when Maribel was little. Mother's Day was never about grand gestures or expensive brunches. It was the one day in May when I could convince myself that magic still lived inside our cramped apartment. I would drag myself home from the early shift, peel off the scent of cleaning supplies, and pull strawberries from the brown paper bag I bought with tip money. With tired hands, I baked shortcake from scratch. Frosting uneven, but sweet enough to make her eyes sparkle. She would run in from the stairwell, clutching a handful of wildflowers she had picked from the cracked sidewalks out front. "For you, Mama," she'd say. As if those dandelions were roses from a royal garden, I'd set them in a jelly jar, and together we would eat cake at the wobbly kitchen table while the afternoon sun painted our walls gold. In those moments, the bills stacked on the counter didn't matter. It was just us, her laughter filling every empty space. My heart convinced we had everything we needed. Years passed, and my knees stiffened from double shifts, but I never let the day slip by unnoticed. Even when we had nothing else, we had our ritual: a cake, a flower, a smile that made the years of sacrifice worth carrying. Now, I sit alone in my modest Michigan kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator replacing her giggles. The air feels quieter without my husband's voice. Gone too soon, leaving me with walls that echo more than they comfort. I smooth the front of my cardigan, the one I saved for special occasions, and stare at my phone. The message from Maribel is short, efficient, stripped of warmth. Don't bring much food. Carmen already planned everything. Carmen, her husband's mother. The name lingers in the text like a watermark that won't fade. I set the phone down slowly, willing the sting to soften. My hands move almost without thought, gathering sugar and berries, the ingredients for the jam I have made every year. Tradition steadies me, even when my place at the table feels uncertain. As the jar cools on the counter, I wonder if this is still my day or if it has already been given away. Before the sun ever thought to rise, I was already inside office buildings that smelled of dust and stale coffee. I pushed my mop across endless floors, my breath fogging against the cold glass as dawn crept over the city. By night, I traded rubber gloves for an apron, balancing trays heavy with plates I could never afford to eat. My feet blistered, my hands cracked. But when I came home to Maribel, I smiled as though exhaustion were nothing more than a passing cloud. There was the year of her quinceañera, when her dreams outgrew my pocketbook. She wanted the kind of celebration her classmates boasted about: dresses that shimmered, halls draped in lights. I opened my jewelry box and held my mother's locket, the one she had pressed into my palm on my 18th birthday. I had once imagined giving it to Maribel, but instead I sold it to cover the down payment for the venue. On the night of the party, I watched her spin beneath the cheap chandeliers, radiant in her new dress, never guessing what I had given up to make it possible. When college bills began to arrive, I added hospital shifts on weekends. I scrubbed floors until bleach burned my throat, clutching every paycheck to keep tuition from bouncing. I lived on peanut butter sandwiches and instant coffee, telling myself hunger was temporary while her education was forever. Then came her wedding, the white dress, the flowers, the photographs meant to last lifetimes. My savings slipped through my fingers faster than water. I signed the loan papers against my retirement fund with a steady hand, convincing myself I would have time to rebuild. Watching her walk down the aisle, I told myself it was worth it. Maribel now lives the life I once prayed she would have: polished floors, a yard without broken fences, comfort I never tasted. Yet, as I think back, a question gnaws at me: did I give her so much that I erased myself in the process? I fasten the lid on the jar of jam, lift it carefully, and prepare to carry it into the house with polished floors. The drive to Illinois felt longer than the miles would suggest. Each turn of the highway reminded me how far I had come from the days when Maribel and I measured distance in bus rides and borrowed gas money. When I pulled into her driveway, I stared for a moment at the house that rose before me. 2 stories of clean brick and wide windows, framed by trimmed hedges and a lawn cut so evenly it looked like velvet. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of lemon polish and roasted meat. The wood floors shone so brightly I hesitated to step forward, afraid my worn shoes might dull them. A dining table stretched across the room, long enough to seat a dozen people without anyone brushing shoulders. Granite countertops gleamed under pendant lights, a silent proclamation that this was a home built on stability and means. It was everything I had once hoped she would have. And yet, standing there, I felt the first chill of distance settle around me. Daniel came quickly, a warm smile on his face as he hugged me, but his embrace was brief. His attention already pulled toward the kitchen clatter and the voices gathering beyond. "So glad you made it," he said, before disappearing back into the swirl of preparations. Carmen was there, her presence filling the room without effort. Pearls rested neatly against her collarbone, and her words rang with practiced confidence as she instructed where dishes should be set, how wine should be poured. Guests leaned toward her as if she were the true host of the evening. I moved quietly to the counter, unwrapping the jar of jam I had made with such care. I set it down beside the platters already overflowing imported cheeses, trays of glossy pastries, meats arranged like artwork. My offering looked small, almost quaint, swallowed by abundance. I folded my hands in front of me, forcing a polite smile. This was the life I had wanted for her. Yet as Carmen's voice rose above the laughter, I felt my place shrinking, as though the floor itself were pushing me further into the background. The dining room buzzed with the hum of voices, forks clinking gently against fine china. Glasses of wine caught the chandelier's light, turning the table into a small galaxy of flickering stars. Daniel told a story about his office, laughter rising from his friends, while Carmen leaned back in her chair with the ease of someone accustomed to being listened to. Maribel sat between them, her face aglow. Each time Carmen spoke about her family's summer house on the coast, or the proper wine to pair with lamb, Maribel's eyes lit up as though she were receiving wisdom from a queen. I watched, remembering the little girl who once thought I held all the knowledge in the world. When the first course was finished, Maribel glanced at me. "Mom, would you mind helping with the plates?" she asked gently, already standing with her own dish in hand. Around the table, others remained seated. Carmen dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, her pearls catching the light, while I carried plates to the kitchen sink. My arms remembered the weight of restaurant trays from decades past. Some habits never leave you. Back at the table, Maribel unveiled Carmen's contribution, a delicate cake from an upscale bakery. Its frosting perfectly swirled, edges lined with candied fruit. Applause and admiration filled the room. Cameras flashed as slices were served, each plate a celebration. In the corner of the counter sat my jar of jam, wrapped in the cloth I had chosen so carefully. It remained unopened, its simple sweetness ignored beneath the gleam of Carmen's imported dessert. I forced my hands to rest still in my lap, forcing my lips into the curve of a smile. Maribel laughed at something Carmen whispered, her cheeks flushed with delight. I watched her eyes sparkle for another woman, and for the first time I realized how quietly a place can be taken, not with cruelty, but with the slow drift of admiration. Turned away. The roast came out glistening, its aroma filling the room with the kind of richness I remembered only from holiday fantasies. Maribel carried it proudly, cheeks flushed with the heat of the kitchen and the praise already circling the table. A polite round of applause rose as she set it down, and Daniel poured wine into waiting glasses as if this were a coronation. Maribel lifted the carving knife, her smile wide and eager. "This is for you, Carmen," she said brightly, eyes fixed on her mother-in-law. She sliced a thick, tender piece from the center, laid it neatly on a porcelain plate, and crowned it with a sprig of rosemary. She placed it in front of Carmen as though serving royalty. Carmen touched her wrist, murmuring thanks, satisfaction shining in her expression. One by one, Maribel carved and served. Daniel received his cut next, then her father-in-law, then the friends who filled the long table. Each portion was generous, carefully arranged, accompanied by laughter and warm conversation. At last, she turned toward me. Her knife scraped at the edges, prying loose pieces that clung stubbornly to the bone-dry scraps, uneven and brittle. She dropped them onto a smaller plate without garnish, without ceremony, without even meeting my eyes. She slid it across the table toward me. No one noticed. No one paused. Daniel busied himself with pouring. Carmen complimented the seasoning. The friends laughed at a joke I hadn't heard. Life flowed on as though nothing had happened. I reached for the plate, my hands steady, though something inside me was not. I set my napkin back in my lap, pressed my fork into the stringy meat, and raised it to my mouth with a smile that felt carved from stone. The silence in me roared, filling every corner of my chest. It was louder than any scream I could have given, louder than any protest I might have made. In that silence, something small and fragile broke, and I knew it could never be repaired. I chewed slowly, swallowed, and told myself it would be the last meal I took at that table. When the last crumbs of cake had been cleared and laughter still floated around the table, I placed my fork down gently and folded my napkin with care. I pushed my chair back, reaching for the coat I had hung neatly behind me. No one noticed. Daniel poured more wine, his voice animated in conversation. Carmen leaned back in her chair, pearls glowing under the chandelier, her hand resting comfortably on the stem of her glass. Maribel carried plates toward the kitchen, her laughter trailing behind her. Not a single glance followed me as I slipped my arms into the sleeves. I opened the front door, its hinges soft, and stepped into the night. The spring rain met me instantly, cool and steady, soaking through the thin fabric at my shoulders. I stood for a moment on the porch, listening to the muffled cheer within, then descended the steps slowly, each one pulling me farther away from the warmth I no longer belonged to. Memories clung to me like ghosts. The greasy aprons I wore until midnight, the heavy trays carried with swollen fingers, the nights I skipped meals so she would have enough, the mornings when aching knees bent over office floors before sunrise. Every sacrifice I made was wrapped in the belief that it would buy me a place at her side forever. But tonight, I knew better. I had given everything, and in the giving, I had become invisible, someone to be used, honored in memory, but not in presence. I tightened the coat around me, its frayed seams heavy with years, and let the rain wash my face clean. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the decision was settled inside me. This would be the last time I sat at her table. Weeks passed in silence after that night. No calls came, no questions asked, no footsteps at my door. I moved through the quiet of my Michigan home, every creak of the floorboards reminding me that the walls had seen more loyalty from me than my own child. One morning, while the kettle hissed, I opened the drawer where I kept the deed and set it on the table. The paper felt lighter than the years it carried. I decided to sell, not because I needed the money, the bills were covered, the pantry stocked, but because I wanted to choose the end of this chapter myself. Too many of my choices had been swallowed by sacrifice. this one would be mine alone. The sale went through quickly. A young couple, wide-eyed and eager, signed papers with excitement I remembered from long ago. I handed them the keys without regret. My past had lived in those rooms. But I no longer did. With the proceeds, I met a lawyer in a sunlit office downtown. We drafted documents for a small foundation funds set aside for women like me, women who gave their lives in service to families that forgot them, caretakers turned invisible, mothers treated as placeholders until usefulness ran dry. Each dollar became a quiet vow. We are not debts to be settled. I let the rest of the family assume I had simply tucked the money away. Rumors traveled faster than truths, and I did not correct them. If Maribel thought an inheritance awaited her, so be it. One day she would discover there was nothing left to claim, nothing to inherit but the silence she had chosen. Sacrifice had always been my choice. It would never again be my debt. With that certainty, I stepped into the next season of my life. The seasons shifted, and months passed in a rhythm I had begun to cherish. My mornings were quiet, filled with books and walks, and my evenings closed with the simple comfort of tea. Maribel's presence was reduced to a handful of short messages, polite, careful words that carried no real warmth. "Hope you're well, Mom. Thinking of you." I answered with civility, but little else. The space between us widened, and I let it. Then one afternoon the phone rang, her name glowing on the screen. My chest tightened, old instincts stirring, but I answered with a steady voice. "Mom," she began, her tone bright but brittle. "I've missed you. Things have been busy." The pause afterward was long, a silence waiting to be filled, when I didn't rush to fill it. She continued, "Daniel lost his job. It's been hard. We're thinking of selling the house." I could hear the catch in her throat, the practiced lightness slipping away. "Carmen's been less available? She said she can't keep helping." Her voice wavered. "You always said you'd be there if I needed you." Between the lines, I heard it clearly, the plea, the reaching hand. The reflex rose inside me, sharp and familiar. The urge to rescue, to sacrifice again. It lived in my bones, trained by years of giving without pause. For a heartbeat, I almost let it speak for me. But then I remembered that night, the plate of scraps, the silence louder than any scream. I thought of the foundation I had built, of the women who deserved to be seen, of the promise I had made to myself. "I'm not in a position to help," I said softly, my voice calm, even kind, "but I truly wish you well." The silence that followed was heavier than rain. Yet when I ended the call, I felt lighter than I had in years. I set the phone down and looked toward the horizon, ready for the life waiting beyond her shadow. I left Michigan with little more than a suitcase and the papers that marked my house as sold. The road west carried me farther than I had ever dreamed I would go, until the air grew salted with the sea and the gulls circled above quiet streets. In a small coastal town in Oregon, I found a modest cottage with weathered shingles and a garden lined with lavender that perfumed the breeze. It was nothing grand, but when I stepped onto the creaking porch, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I began to build a new rhythm. At the community center, I joined an art class for women who wanted to remember themselves after years of forgetting. Some had survived illness, some widowhood, some the loneliness of children who had gone silent. We painted with shaky hands and laughed when the colors bled outside the lines. Each story shared was a mirror, showing me that I was not alone in my loss nor in my resilience. When Mother's Day came again, I decided to make it mine. I painted posters that read simply, "Everyone welcome," that afternoon. The town center filled with people who had no place else to go, men with no children to visit them, women whose families had drifted far, neighbors too shy to knock on one another's doors. We set a long table with mismatched chairs and simple dishes. There was no head of the table, no one to be served first or last. When the roast was ready, we carved it together, hands bumping clumsily. Laughter rising like music, plates were passed, bread broken, stories traded as though we had known each other for years. Looking down that table, I realized that family could be chosen, built out of kindness and presence rather than obligation. For the first time, I felt whole again, and I knew the life I had begun here was only the beginning. The cottage has grown into me, its rhythms becoming my own. Each morning, I open the window to the salt air and tend the roses I planted in clay pots along the sill. Their petals unfold slowly, shy at first, then generous, spilling color against the glass. I trim them carefully, speaking to them as though they were old companions. Their presence reminds me that beauty, like love, thrives only where it is nurtured. I spend my days painting, walking along the shore, sharing meals with neighbors who have become more than acquaintances. In the evenings, I sit by the window with tea, watching the tide pull and return, steady as breath. I think often about the years behind me, the sacrifices I once believed were investments in love. Now I understand love was never meant to be a ledger. It is not a transaction to be tallied, not a bargain sealed with leftovers on a plate. One afternoon, the postman delivered an envelope bearing Maribel's handwriting. I held it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter, careful and uneven, filled with words of apology and regret. She wrote of realizing too late what I had carried, of wishing she had seen me sooner, loved me better. But this time, there was no plea, no demand, no request for rescue, only words, fragile as petals, trying to bridge a distance that could not fully close. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. My hand lingered on the wood before I whispered into the quiet. Too late, but I wish you peace. The words settled in me, heavy and light all at once. I turned back to the window, to the roses blooming in the last light of day. A mother can give everything, but no mother should be loved only when it's convenient, when love is reduced to scraps. Is walking away betrayal, or the beginning of dignity?